Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With coronavirus cases increasing by over 170,000 a day, Maharashtra is by far the worst state. Joining me now to explain just how serious the problem in Maharashtra is, why he believes it's got to this point, and what he believes is now necessary for the government to do, is a member of the Maharashtra COVID 19 task force and one of India's top endocrinologists, Shashank Joshi. Dr. Joshi, let's start with the overall situation in Maharashtra. After that, I'll come to the situation in Mumbai. If you set aside the results that were announced yesterday, Monday, because they actually reflect testing on Sunday, which goes down, Maharashtra is in fact increasing by 63,000 a day. That's way more than the first surge last year. So let me start by asking you, how worried are you by the overall situation in the state of Maharashtra?
Karanji, first of all, thanks for having me over. And it's a very, very grim situation. It's a very serious situation in Maharashtra. And week after week, we have seen a very geometric, exponential rise and explosion of cases. And as we ramped up testing in a very aggressive mode and have ramped up from somewhere around 30,000 somewhere in early February to almost 2.5 lakhs, we have seen an exponential jump week after week from anywhere from 10, 15,000 to 60, 65,000. And we are seeing a clear tsunami of cases which are there in Mumbai and Maharashtra.
Let me then come at this point to Mumbai, because Mumbai seems to suggest a slightly different picture, and I want to check whether that's real or whether that's deceptive. I noticed for the last 4 or 5 days, Mumbai has grown by under 10,000 cases a day. I'm told that, in fact, over this period, the positivity rate in Mumbai has fallen from around 24, 25% to something like 18%. Is that a sign that Mumbai, the capital, has seen the worst and is turning a corner, or is it too early to come to that conclusion?
I think, Karan, you're absolutely right. We wish and pray that that is true. What happened in Mumbai is Mumbai has a very thick tail, and I'm underlining it as a thick tail. So it always never dipped down. And when we ramped up our testing, in the last surge, we were testing max to 18 to 22,000, and we never saw numbers crossing 2,000 or 3,000. In this current surge, we suddenly saw an explosion where we started testing up to 50, 55,000, and we saw the numbers crossing 10,000 very routinely and regularly. However, in the last 4 to 5 days, we are seeing numbers at around 8,000, 9,000, 7,000, even 6,900 yesterday. So clearly, we can see a trend that there is a plateauing phenomenon which is occurring in Mumbai. And in a week or week and a half, if this trend continues, probably Mumbai will see a downward trend. And this is very reassuring. And you rightly pointed out that the test positivity rate, which had gone up to almost 27, 28%, is now down to 16 to 18%. And this is a very reassuring trend because of the aggressive testing mode in Mumbai. We definitely still are not out of the woods, but we are seeing a plateauing phenomenon. And therefore, it's a very reassuring sign.
We have, therefore, a very interesting, somewhat contradictory picture. The trend in Mumbai, the capital, is reassuring. We hope it continues. But the trend in Maharashtra, the state, is deeply depressing. You used words like a tsunami of cases, exponential growth, geometric rise. So let's talk a bit about the situation in Maharashtra as a whole. What, in your eyes, is the cause of this huge second surge? Is it simply lax COVID behavior, as the central government and the health ministry in Delhi keep insisting? Or do you believe the surge in Maharashtra this time is directly a result of the double mutant strain that has been found in the state?
So let me be very frank and transparent here. Till the early February, we had almost seen the dip of the surge. We had anticipated the second surge. It is not that we didn't anticipate between the 25th of December and 26th of January, because they were colder months and we thought that behaviorally the cold virus would survive then. And we had some Gram Panchayat elections, and there were less exposed geographies in Maharashtra, particularly in the regions of Vidarbha and Marathwada, particularly in the regions of Amravati, Akola, Yavatmal. We definitely saw an outbreak. This outbreak was like a cluster. which means very quickly families were getting affected, colonies were getting affected, and we suspected that there was a potential of some genomic variation, the one which was observed similar to that in Kent, United Kingdom. And then some genomic testing was done in a local homegrown lab of BJ Medical School microbiology department, which picked up two types of strains, which were later confirmed, and some samples were sent to NIV and some samples were sent to the CSIR labs. But the primary thing was that even after that, from these small geographies, less exposed geographies, these numbers kept on spiraling up. And gradually, the urban metropolis, again, even here, we saw demographic change. We saw people with not the lower socioeconomic status like Dharavi slum population, which had already developed antibodies, but the less exposed population in the high rises, they were the ones who were starting picking up the disease. And this was due to complete lack of COVID appropriate protocols not being followed. And people at large, they were rural or urban, they thought the COVID is over. There is no need to mask. There is no need to follow protocols for that. And that was a mistake. This particular wave has a clinical strain. What I mean by clinical strain, we will keep on debating on these genomics, whether it is gene A, gene B, mutant A, mutant B, but whatever is the strain, and it is for the genomic scientists, which is now closely collaborating with the government of Maharashtra, particularly from CSIR and ICMR, they are trying to identify that. But one thing is very clear-cut, Karan, and there can be no denial of this fact, and nobody should be on denial of that fact. This current wave has a faster spreading virus. It may be a little less virulent, but it's faster spreading, no question.
And
in the past, if one member of the family got affected, yes, if one member of the family got affected, then in the past, maybe 2 or 3 got affected. In the current strain, if one member of the family got affected, almost 8 to 10 people get affected, and even a small exposure of a few minutes and the virus gets transmitted. This is our clinical observation. These observations initially were anecdotal. They were dismissed off, but this is where we should have tightened up our public health measures. See, there has to be a zero tolerance, Karan, for COVID appropriate measures and behavior. And you can't just dismiss that, and the other thing was complacency setting. So what happened, Karan, is that people kept on not, following the norms, despite of knowing it is faster spreading. It was probably less virulent. The case fatality rate was very low. So people got more complacent. Yeah.
Can I put this to you? You're saying two very important things. I'm simply repeating them. One, laxity, people becoming irresponsible, people not following COVID appropriate behavior made them more susceptible. And that applied particularly to the well-off people in high-rich buildings. However, what they became susceptible to was a strain of the virus that is more infectious, which is spreading faster. And that second point, that it's more infectious, it's spreading faster, clearly suggests, doesn't it, that it is some sort of mutant strain. It is not just lax behavior on its own, it's the combination of lax behavior with a more infectious strain that is creating this huge surge. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. It's a double whammy. It's a double whammy of complete zero tolerance, zero inappropriate behavior, followed by a fast spreading strain, which may be less virulent, which made people more complacent. See, Karan, one thing you need to understand, when they saw that this strain doesn't kill, they got more, they got more rebellious. See, as human beings, we tend to rebel, we tend to be revengeful, we tend to be aggressive. And unfortunately, COVID virus is going to multiply. All viruses, Karan, will multiply and mutate. And we have to be mindful. It is a battle between the virus and the human being or the human host. And in this battle, the virus will keep mutating. But we were too dismissive of the mutant strain, knowing fully well that it is a faster spreading strain. And we should have been more cautious and careful. We should have been very, very clear that this is a double whammy. It is spreading faster. And if we had pulled up our socks, red flagged it, we would have probably been in a better position. Unfortunately, gatherings continue. Social gatherings continue, weddings continue. Everything was like life is normal. And in that, they could have still managed it had they been tight masking, double masking, COVID appropriate protocols being followed, and behavior being contained.
Let's for a moment talk about the mutant strain, because as you said, we became complacent about the mutant strain. Let's talk a bit about it. I believe this double mutant consists of two separate mutations. The first is called L452R, and it's said to be more infectious. The second is said to be E484Q, and it's believed that it's more resistant to the AstraZeneca vaccine. Doesn't that combination of mutations make this mutant strain particularly worrying? It's both more infectious and more resistant to vaccine.
So, Karan, that may be a little bit of an exaggeration. One thing I buy in that this is a more infectious strain. Whether it is having an immune escape phenomenon to a vaccine, I don't know. So that needs better delineation and answers. First point, I completely agree that this double mutant, whether it is a E384 or L452R, both of them have a aggressive, faster transmission. So they actually spread fast. Not only they spread fast, what you're seeing in Delhi now, from nose, the COVID was commonly in the nose, then the throat, then the lungs. Sometimes it's bypassing now the nose and throat and it's straight going into the lungs. And the lung CT scan is abnormal, the PCR test is negative, and you have a challenge there and person is desaturating. So the rapidity and the quickness
That
of
is
the
a
spread is what is worrying. Most people are still recovering. Most people are still recovering. Coming back to your genomic mutations, I think in 20% of the analyzed in Vidarbha, there was the L452R strain as found by NCDC, as found by the genomic scientists from CSIR and ICMR. And that went in public domain, but tardy a little too late, almost after a month and a half. And that is why now the Director General of ICMR, Dr. Shekhar Mande, has now set up a collaboration between the government of Maharashtra district-wise.
Okay. Let me
Like they did in Kerala, district by district.
Let me at that point just make one little point. The belief that this double mutant may be more resistant to AstraZeneca was told to us by Shahid Jamil, who's one of India's top virologists, but I'm prepared to accept your point that that still has to be proven. What does seem much more certain is that this strain is more infectious, and as you said, it sometimes bypasses the nose and the throat and goes straight to the lung, which means not only is it more infectious, when it hits you, it could hit you in a much worse way. Let's take the point you were making about genome sequencing. I recall correctly that 6 weeks ago, maybe even 8 weeks ago, you were warning on NDTV that the fast growing clusters that were emerging in Amaravati and in Kola suggested the behavior of a mutant strain. And at the time, you expressed concern that genome sequencing wasn't happening effectively or even quickly. Am I correct in that impression? That when we could have been fast in doing genome sequencing, we were slow?
Absolutely. I think we needed to ramp it up and we needed to be very transparent on the results and the correlations. See, genomic tests are very expensive. They are done in some of the best labs. India should be proud of its scientists because we have the best scientists. But our turnaround time and has to be quick and fast. And now I'm happy to state that the Director General of CSIR has promised us a 48-hour turnaround time for these sequences. But I wish at that point of time we had more transparency on the results, because by the time they accepted that there was a strain of UK strain in Punjab, which is impacting Delhi now, or there was this L542 strain in Akola, Amaravati, which is affecting Maharashtra now, we could have been more aggressive. But that doesn't, Karan, still justify the total lack of masking and compliance. People see virus is in the body. I don't disagree. Virus will be studied by virologists and genomic scientists. I don't disagree. But human beings need to change their mind. The virus is going to get better of them. We have become so rebellious, Karan, that we just don't want to listen.
Can I ask you one more question, Dr. Joshi, about genome sequencing? You mentioned how the Director General of the CSIR has assured you that the turnaround time will now be reduced to just 48 hours. He's also going to do genome sequencing in direct relation with the Maharashtra government, district by district. Are you now satisfied that at this point in time, when you believe a more infectious strain is driving the surge in Maharashtra, we will have adequate and effective genome sequencing? We didn't have it adequately and effectively 6-8 weeks ago, but now today, are you satisfied that we will have adequate genome sequencing?
So, Karan, that's a tough question to answer. But I will tell you very honestly, the behavior of COVID virus or coronavirus is predictably unpredictable. So we will have to keep and generate a setup where every we test and keep testing, and we call this genomic sequencing and surveillance. And I'm happy that the Director General of CSIR, ICMR are now putting out constructs where there is a correlation between the clinical case scenario and the genomic sequencing. And this, if it is regularly done on a periodic basis, we will see our current second wave we are already in. Our whole target is to avoid the third wave and the fourth wave, which we have seen all over the world. We should learn and look east. We have been looking only at the west all the time. And from the west, what have we learned? France is in the fourth wave. Michigan is in the fourth wave. UK had a very bad second wave. 100 years back, we had the Spanish flu. We had a very bad second wave. So we need to ensure that this collaboration is sustainable. It is reproducible. It is long-term. And that is the endeavor now of Government of India and Government of Maharashtra working for a common enemy. There is a common enemy, common goal. There has to be that approach.
As you said, Dr. Joshi, there have been improvements in the genome sequencing. You do take satisfaction from the fact that it will happen more effectively, but just how effectively still has to be seen. There are still a few question marks. They haven't all disappeared. Let's at this point, Dr. Joshi, come to the healthcare response in Maharashtra. NDTV on Sunday showed visuals of the elevator lobby at Lilavati Hospital, which clearly had been converted into an emergency COVID ward. So my first question is, in Mumbai today, are hospitals running short of beds, running short of ventilators, running short of oxygen?
Absolutely. I think what has happened in Mumbai city today is, as I told you, the demography of the current pandemic and the socioeconomic status has gone to a better socioeconomic class. I work at Lilavati. My friend Jalil Parkar was on television that time, and you could see that a lobby had to be converted into beds because we were simply overwhelmed. And we had beds at KM, at the jumbo centers, but nobody wanted to go. So even today, if you go on the dashboard, there are beds which are available. So healthcare infrastructure wise, and yesterday also you must have seen our Chief Minister and Municipal Commissioner have announced another 2,000 beds being added in Mumbai. So healthcare infrastructure in Mumbai is adequate, but the socio-economic demographic of the neo-rich did not want to go to the public health infrastructure, which is pretty robust, mind you, and did not want to go to those. And that is why all the private hospitals came under a huge strain for beds. That is why you saw those pictures. They are real pictures.
I take the point you're making, Dr. Joshi, that the demography is the main cause why large private hospitals are now completely short of beds, because richer people are getting it in bigger numbers and they're going to large private hospitals rather than to public hospitals. However, let me quote the Indian Express of Sunday. That's just 36 hours ago. The paper carried a report where it says, and I'm quoting, several BMC hospital doctors told the Express they had to turn away patients due to lack of beds. The report in particular cites the Dahisar Jumbo Center, the Nesco Jumbo Center, the BKC Jumbo Center, Baba Bandra Hospital, and Sion Hospital. In fact, the Express report even says that the BMC War Room has started saying all beds are full. Doesn't that suggest that even government hospitals where poorer people are more likely to go, are getting filled up and are having to turn people away?
Absolutely. No question asked. I completely agree with you, Karan, there, that we are overwhelmed. In fact, there was an emergency meeting held by the Bombay Municipal Commissioner on Sunday, and now the war rooms will have a 12-hour shift. You see, the challenge in Mumbai to get an appointment for RT-PCR takes 2 days. Then to get the report takes another 2 days. And then to get a bed takes another 2 days. So 6 hours are lost. 6 days are lost. These are precious 6 days. And that is why digital medicine is the need of the hour. We need to suspect COVID, self-isolate. Get in touch with your medical provider, private or public. Get in touch with the ward room. Somebody needs to handhold you through this process. And that is the only way we can save the current exponential tsunami we are facing. Mumbai has risen up to the occasion. Mumbai has countered from riots to floods. And this is an unusual war we are facing against the virus. So the war rooms now are going to be Mumbai has got totally decentralized now. Mumbai is not one Mumbai now. Mumbai is 24 Mumbais of 24 wards. Each ward officer is as good as a municipal commissioner, and each ward officer will have 12-hour shifts, and even the reports will be delivered at every 12 hours, not every 24
Okay, the
hours.
war room, in other
And we
words,
are clearly seeing that we need to build up this. Yes.
you're saying that the war room, in other words, will work much more effectively, much more promptly and swiftly. In which case, let me ask you this. Outside Mumbai, what is the situation in the rest of Maharashtra? I'm talking in particular of cities like Pune, Nasik, Nagpur. What is the situation there?
The situation in Nasik, Pune, and Nagpur is extremely, very, very disturbing. And I'm very distressed. The healthcare infrastructure, private and public, is completely overwhelmed. And it's a very, very sorry state of affairs. It's a complete war-like situation there. And we are completely overwhelmed in these three particular geographies you mentioned. And that is the reason, on a very, very, war footing, we need to have capacity building to be done in a much more aggressive way. Because you see, these places have test positivity rates of almost 25 to 30%. We have to ensure that the most deserving get the bed in the hospital, the most deserving get the oxygen bed, and not an asymptomatic or a mild case. An asymptomatic and a mild case under medical supervision can be managed at home by a team of doctors and nurses, while the most deserving should be in the hospitals. So we need to ensure that we have to follow an ATM policy, assess the patient for the risk, then do the triage or transfer, and then do the management. And all three processes have to work at the same time. So I totally buy your point that we are in a very grim state outside of Mumbai.
Let me at this point just repeat some of the very important things you said about the situation in Pune, Nasik, and Nagpur. You said it's extremely and very, very disturbing. You said you were yourself very distressed. You said the healthcare system has been completely overwhelmed. This brings to my mind a report I saw on the BBC on Sunday, again, just 36 hours ago. It was a report from Pune, and it spoke of a woman called Mary Arokya Das, who was refused admission in 6 hospitals, one after another, because they had no beds, and she died before she got to the 7th hospital. Is that sort of story becoming more common in Pune, in Nashik, and in Nagpur?
Yes, but here we need to be a little more responsive, and they should contact a phone rather than going from pillar to post in hospitals. And now all hospitals have been told to at least give emergency treatment. You see, there has to be a better triaging. There have to be a 24-hour OPD where at least baseline treatment starts. See, the first contact, we need to start treatment, and we need to give treatment at home in corona care facilities as well as in private hospitals, and so that the doctors can triage out the most deserving patients. It is very tragic that when our healthcare infrastructure gets overwhelmed, we will see such unfortunate episodes. But at the same time, this is, as I said, like a tsunami, and we have to rise up to the occasion. I'm an optimist. Mumbai is already seeing a plateau. I'm reasonably certain that the next 2 to 4 weeks, even we'll see Maharashtra coming out of the woods and plateauing of the second surge.
I get the impression that whereas you began by accepting that the situation in Mumbai is bad, hospitals are overcrowded, both private hospitals and public hospitals, the situation outside Mumbai, in Pune, Nashik, and Nagpur, is yet worse. So Bombay is bad, but outside Mumbai, the situation is really heart-rendingly worse.
Absolutely. I would agree and stand by that. That Mumbai is bad and the situation outside Mumbai is far worse. But as I said, we are resilient and we will be able to rise up to the occasion. Our healthcare infrastructure is being ramped up at an exponential speed. Our testing facilities have saturated up. So we are trying to now get better testing mechanisms. We are trying to bypass the RNA extraction process of the RT-PCR by using a dry swab method from the CCMB in Hyderabad, trying to collaborate with them.
Okay.
We are trying to use the Tata MD, the Falun
You're bringing
trying to use innovative ideas.
You're bringing in new forms of testing so that the limitations of RT-PCR are taken care of. Tell me something else. This time round, with the second surge, is the incidence of serious illness and death less than it was last year, or is that hard to say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the case fatality rate is clearly much less than what it was last year. Unfortunately, if the sheer numbers exponentially rise, then we will definitely see an increase in the deaths. But currently, the current so-called clinical phenotype of the strain clearly shows that there is a lower case fatality rate, and it is all about timing. COVID treatment has a 2 to 3 week timetable, and if we are able to intervene on time, identify the happy hypoxia on time in the second week, and give them oxygen and care and steroids at the right time, we can save lives. So clearly in this surge, we are seeing that this strain has a low case fatality rate, and we can save lives provided people come on time and they get treatment and the beds are available. But the numbers are so huge that if
You're
this
making,
numbers
you're making a very important point, Dr. Joshi. The case fatality rate in the second surge is clearly lower than the first. However, you also added that because the absolute number of people getting infected is going up, in absolute terms, the number of people who fall ill and who sadly also die will also go up. In percentage terms, compared to last year, it's sharply down. But in absolute terms, the numbers will be large, both of illness and death, because more people are getting infected. We have to accept both sides of this story together.
absolutely, I agree.
We're coming to the end of this interview. Before I end, Dr. Joshi, I want to also talk to you about vaccination. The state government has repeatedly said it is not getting sufficient doses, there is shortage, and as a result, over the weekend, several vaccination sites had to suspend giving vaccination. On the other hand, the central government and the health minister, Harshvardhan in particular, insist that there is enough supply of vaccination to Maharashtra. They claim that the state government is playing politics or that the state government has mismanaged the situation. As an independent observer, what is your view?
So I think we need better management of vaccination program, and we need the supply chain to be adequate. Whatever happened and whichever stakeholder is at fault, we don't know. Nobody would know the truth. But one thing is sure that many centers, like for example, at Lilavati Hospital, our center was closed for 3 days for vaccination, which is sad. When we are having a vaccine drive by the Honorable Prime Minister, we all need to come as one India. And we need to bury all our differences and ensure that a very, very badly affected state like Maharashtra should be given complete priority to ensure that vaccines are there for the eligible people as early as possible.
Again, you're making a
In
very
fact, I would go
important
further on the demand that between 18 and 45 also, people in the vulnerable group who are having comorbidities also should be vaccinated. There were two issues which were very, very crucial. Number one, ensure that there is a constant stream of supply. That is what the CoWIN app was supposed to ensure, that every center has sufficient supply. And I think that was a transient thing. Yesterday, I'm happy to note that the supplies have been restored. That is the first thing. Second thing is that you also need to understand that if a vial is getting wasted, then we need to ensure that people who are in the comorbidities between 18 to 45 should get an exceptional vaccination. We have to vaccinate as many people as possible. Of course, I agree with Government of India that vaccinate the most vulnerable first. I totally buy that point. But here, when you have a tsunami, when you are at war, when we are overwhelmed with cases, the earlier you will vaccinate, the better it is to prevent the third wave.
Again, Dr. Joshi, just because the line from time to time keeps breaking up, I'm repeating the point you made. You said three critical things. Yes, we do need better management of vaccination in Maharashtra. And in a sense, when you say that, your finger is pointing at the state government. You also say we need better supply
No,
of vaccines,
I
more.
think it is for
You're
both the parties. I think both the
absolutely.
stakeholders.
I was coming to the second
I
part.
think both the stakeholders. Yeah,
I
so
was
there is
coming to
no
the
buck
second
passing.
party, sir. I was coming to the second party. You also say we need better supply of vaccines. They need to come more promptly in bigger numbers. And there you're pointing the finger at the central government. In a sense, you're pointing fingers at both at the same time. And then you made a very important third point that although we must vaccinate the vulnerable to begin with, now when there's a tsunami of cases, we must also start vaccinating people with comorbidities between the ages of 18 and 45. That's a new category that the central government has not as yet accepted. You're saying we must vaccinate people with comorbidities between the ages of 18 and 45 because they too, in a tsunami, are vulnerable. Have I understood
Absolutely.
and repeated what you said correctly?
So I think I don't want to point fingers at either state or center. We are in a war. We have to all work together. But at the same time, I would definitely say that these glitches should never happen again. That is the first lesson. And the second lesson is that we see originally what government of India envisaged is everybody above 50 will get vaccinated and people with comorbidities below 50 will get vaccinated. It was a very, very logical and a prudent plan. Later on, when the vaccination program started, they changed the starts on 1st of March to people above 60 and between 45 and 60 with comorbidities. I think that first plan, which that originally envisaged, probably was the most apt plan. And that covered the most vulnerable people to die. Because we need to save lives. You need to understand one thing, Karan, from this current surge, which I forgot to mention. In the current surge, people between 40s and 20s are getting affected. We are seeing a younger population in our COVID wards now, and also children for the first time we are seeing getting affected. So therefore, when the demographics of the second surge suggest that a large working population between 20 and 40 or 50 is affected, we need to ensure, at least in those geographies, a more innovative strategy for vaccination.
That's very clear. One more point about vaccination. Another article in Sunday's Indian Express made a very interesting point that most people don't seem to be aware of. The article said that the rate of increase, I'm talking of the rate of increase in vaccination in Maharashtra after the third phase of vaccination began, is 96.39%. The rate of increase for the rest of the country is 89.48%. Maharashtra is clearly almost 7% ahead of the national average. Secondly, that Indian Express article on Sunday pointed out that there are cities like Pune, Thane, Nagpur, and Nasik where the rate of increase is even more than 96%. In fact, in Nagpur, the paper claims it's an astonishing rate of increase of 206%. So, my question is simple. Side by side with this tsunami of cases, is it also true that vaccination is proceeding quite satisfactorily, despite the fact from time to time you don't have enough supplies? Because the rate of increase in Maharashtra is considerably more than the nationwide rate of increase.
That is very true, because you see, the geographies you mentioned saw the swarming of cases. And then suddenly people who were hesitant to take the vaccine went ahead and got vaccinated. And that is something which have naturally happened. And I'm very happy that people are willing to get vaccinated in our state. This is a large problem across India, and we need to ensure that the most vulnerable get vaccinated. So I think we need to support this. We need to be proactive, we need to be supportive, and we need to be very practical about this. And I'm happy that places like Nagpur are showing a very high incidence of this.
My last question, Dr. Joshi. It's widely reported in the papers that the Chief Minister will decide with his cabinet tomorrow on the 14th whether a complete lockdown is needed in Maharashtra. In the light of all that you've told me, both about the situation in Mumbai and the situation outside Mumbai, what would be your advice to Mr. Thackeray? Does Maharashtra need a complete lockdown, or is it not necessary at this point of time?
There is a severe allergy to the term lockdown, correct? And the word lockdown is viewed with a lot of negativity. And I think we need to be very positive and put restrictions in place. So if someone, this is not my domain expertise at all. This is for policy planners to make a call between livelihood, economy, and between healthcare infrastructure being overburdened. When do we want a so-called lockdown? The lockdown is necessary when the healthcare infrastructure is completely overburdened and there is no other choice left to the administration. So administration in their wisdom will take an appropriate call. But my belief is that if we can manage this with restrictive measures without a lockdown, that is what the science tells us. So restrictive measures are mandatory. I feel the strongest restrictive measure is zero tolerance during unlocking. You have to look east in this, Karan, and I'm going to make this point, if you allow me 2 minutes, sir. That look at east, look at Vietnam, look at Taiwan, look at Singapore, look at Thailand, look at Japan, Korea, and China. They have mask and they have zero tolerance for non-mask. To the extent that what they do there is the masking fines are as high as 5,000, 10,000 rupee equivalents. And It is mandatory across rural and urban geographies of these countries, and they have been able to contain the pandemic. Even if you extend it to Australia and New Zealand, they have done a wonderful job. And if somebody repeatedly offends a COVID protocol which is not followed, there is zero tolerance. Unless and until we adopt, we will back to square one. If you suddenly lock down and then suddenly unlock, you will again see the same phenomenon of a yo-yo phenomenon. We need to be very clear in our strategy that we need to change the behavior of human beings, that this virus can enter us. We need to mask, if not one, to put 2 masks.
That's a very clear answer. You believe, speaking personally, because you said this is not your field of expertise, what we need is restrictive measures rather than a lockdown. And the most important restrictive measure is to wear a mask all the time and as often as possible maintain social distancing and sanitize. And I suppose it also goes that you're very happy there are no state elections happening in Maharashtra at the moment, and therefore no need for big electoral campaigns, because what is happening in Bengal, where huge campaigns are taking place every day without masks, without social distancing, and what is happening in Haridwar, where millions are turning up for Shahi Shnans without social distancing and without masks, is very, very dangerous. You need to ensure, not just in Maharashtra, all over the country, that masks are worn, social distance is observed. I thank you, Dr. Joshi, for making time for me, particularly when you have so many other pressing concerns to do with coronavirus in Maharashtra. And thank you for explaining so transparently that this situation in Maharashtra is really serious. As you said, it's a very, very serious situation in the state as a whole. There's a geometric rise of exponential proportions. And outside Mumbai, you said the situation is distressing. The healthcare system is overwhelmed. I hope audiences listen and in the light of the Maharashtra experience nationwide realize we have to keep wearing masks. Thank you, Dr. Joshi. Take care. Stay safe.